Moms have been providing affordable housing and resilient strategies since the beginning. So we thank you for your guidance. Yeah. So I was just talking here briefly with Jerry Murphy during one of the other sessions. It's amazing how far this field has come, where we've gone with it. I started as a planner with Hillsborough County back in 1998 on a grant that was shared between emergency management and planning. So it was a local mitigation strategy. And at that time, I was going out with what looked like a surface to air missile case. And it was a GPS unit to collect data on where our critical infrastructure was, because you would go out to a maintenance site, and if you wanted to know where the pump station was, they would say, sorry, Bob's not here today. And as far as I know, it's the fourth tree down from here, and then you go 200 yards out. So, being the true Gen Xer, that's kind of what I started, was migrating from paper products and paper asset management to digital. And, now we have all these crazy LiDAR and environmental layers that we can use now, and social layers. So this stuff has just become so much more rich. And it's really exciting to lead this session here, because a lot of these activities were just maps in the past, and they were granular. And now we're getting to how do we apply all those lessons learned and all that strategy that's come out of researching these data and figuring out how these pieces fit together. So with that, we are going to talk a little bit here about density and how that commingles now with resilience aspects, as well as still preserving your community character. So we have a great panel. Here we have Derek Kilborn, who manages the City of St. Pete's Urban Planning and Historic Preservation Division within the Planning and Development Services Department. Linda Fisher is going to go next. Linda is a principal planner with Ford Pinellas. And lastly, but least, we have Jerry Murphy. Sorry, Jerry. Jerry. It's going to make a Seinfeld joke, but I think everybody's of age here. They know what Seinfeld was. So Jerry's great to work with. He's done a ton of information for ASFPM and your Florida Floodplain Managers Group. He's doing a great job of educating and doing community planning for areas in the Bay Area. So with that, I will pass it to Derek.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Derek Kilborn, and as you heard in the introduction, I manage the City of St. Petersburg's Urban Planning and Historic Preservation Division. Also with me today, we have several members of our city team, and we've been asked to talk to you today about all of the housing initiatives we are working on in approximately 5 minutes. So I will let you know now that I am planning to stay for the rest of the afternoon, and certainly open to talking to you after this session here. I thought I had everything worked out about what I was going to talk to you about today. And I realized that I don't know anything about the fifth dimension. So hopefully we'll touch on what is helpful to you. But we've kind of set this up in the context of both housing resiliency and coastal resiliency. And we're going to try to walk you through some of the initiatives that we are currently working on now. You've heard this morning a lot about NIMBYism and some of the challenges associated with that. I will say that I think in the city of St. Petersburg, perhaps because of the long planning legacy that we have in the city, I think that we have been able to manage the NIMBY response a little better than perhaps some other communities. And in a way that it is helping us find compromise solutions that most importantly are achieving results. And so one of the things that we have been working on in the past is some current challenges that we're dealing with. First, with coastal high hazard area. So you're going to see a map in a minute that identifies the coastal high hazard impact on the city of St. Petersburg. In 2016, those maps were updated. And for our community, our city, the size of the coastal high hazard area more than doubled. And so the impact was very significant to our future planning. And we had to try to deal with that in some unique ways that would allow us to continue to think about redevelopment of the city's primary corridors, but also deal with existing development allowances in those coastal high hazard area and vulnerable zones. And so in that initial change that we made, we adopted several allowances to help us redevelop those corridors, but most importantly, it imposed new development standards on multifamily projects within the coastal high hazard area. The second thing that we've done recently is most of you in this room are probably familiar with House Bill 1339. St. Petersburg has been very aggressive in implementing a process to use that state statute for developing affordable housing in the city. And we have our first project called Fairmont Apartments that was recently approved, and we can talk about that in question answers. And then the third thing that we're working on is, and this is related to housing resiliency, is a lending analysis. So Ford Pinellas has been a great partner. You heard from Whit Blanton earlier today. Linda Fisher is presenting with me now. And the lending analysis is a study that we were conducting in partnership with the Urban Land Institute in trying to find out how to empower property owners on the financing and lending side to get access to capital for building 2 to 4 unit projects. And so I'm talking to you about land use and zoning today, but we are thinking about this more comprehensively. The first of 3 slides that I have on the screen here is showing you some of the thoughts and approaches to first expanding accessory dwelling units within the city of St. Petersburg. We, starting in 2007, allowed accessory dwelling units to be built in our neighborhood traditional zoning categories, which are the older neighborhoods surrounding the downtown. And so that primarily covers the white area of the map that you see towards the center. That was a big change for us in 2007. It recognized the historic development pattern in those traditional areas where we already had many accessory dwelling units built in the 1920s and 30s. So the effort right now is to look at expanding accessory dwelling units into the remaining balance of the city. And that includes into what we call our neighborhood suburban areas. So the character of these neighborhoods are very different. They're vehicle oriented. These are more of your mid-century homes, your low profile, wide to the street ranch style houses. And as we've kind of moved through the discussion over the last several years about how to do that, we've kind of narrowed in on a couple conditions or controlling factors for how to do that in a way that is mutually agreeable to most of the neighborhoods in those suburban areas. First, some of our neighborhood suburban areas do have rear loading alleys. And so those are very compatible with accessory dwelling units. Second, looking at lots that are 10,000 square feet or more in size. And third, corner properties that are fronting to 2 streets that provides a little more accessibility to side and rear yards. We've also looked at some parking changes and parking reductions, particularly when they are in proximity to corridors that have existing public transit. And so that's really important change that we are focused on. The map that you have here on this slide is showing you all the qualified parcels based on minimum lot size, 10,000 square feet or more. So you could see there is potential to add approximately 9,355 parcels. The next thing that we are looking at is changing single family zoning along what we call in the city future major streets. These are really primary access corridors. And so we have a new zoning category that was created called neighborhood traditional mixed residential, or NTM. These are your 2 to 4 unit building typologies. The map that's on the screen is showing you the qualified parcels along those corridors. And also relating to the morning discussion, you'll see that the cream colored kind of organic shape around the edges is the city's coastal high hazard area. So when we're talking about expanding this development type, we are looking at it only outside of the coastal high hazard area. Right now, the plan for this summer is to approve these parcels for change, but there is an ongoing discussion in the community about also considering going back into the neighborhoods a little deeper than just the frontage to the main corridor itself. And then finally, in the city, we have a neighborhood corridor and center concept of zoning. And this map is showing you the primary corridors where we have mixed use zoning. And right now, these corridor categories have anywhere in the range from 15 to 40 to 60 units per acre, plus a workforce housing bonus. And so the third set of amendments that we are working on is to increase not only the maximum allowable density for the category itself, but also increase the workforce housing bonus. And again, that cream color on the map is showing you the coastal high hazard area. So we have to be sensitive to that, and the focus is only on those areas outside of the coastal high hazard area. So as a way to kind of close this introduction and pass it off to Linda Fisher from Forward Pinellas. Forward Pinellas has been a great partner to the city as we consider these changes, and also relating to the density increases. There has been a lot of discussion and effort countywide to consider how to do that in an appropriate way that preserves character. And so Linda, thank you for that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Is my mic on? Okay, great, thanks. And I have a few slides that, there we go. No. Nope, that one's Jerry's. There we go. Great. Thank you. So this conference, of course, is about housing and resiliency, but you've been hearing over and over mention of transit and jobs of being part of that equation. The reason is you can't really talk about any one of these things without running into the others. Whether you can live comfortably is about more than just the cost of housing. Wherever you live, you've still got to get to work or school, the doctor's office, grocery store, and so forth. And unfortunately, the most affordable housing tends to be the farthest away from those things. After housing, transportation is typically the second biggest expense that a household faces. And that includes things like car payments, insurance, repairs, and as we're all very familiar with, gas prices. The latest estimate we have is from a few years ago, but it shows that the average household in Pinellas County spends 24% of its income on transportation. You may be familiar with the benchmark that a household should spend no more than 30% of its income on housing. The corresponding benchmark for transportation is 15%. So our average household was already cost burdened even before the current economic crisis. Our best current estimate is that 1 out of every 3 households is cost burdened, and transportation costs are a big part of that. But in Pinellas, there just aren't very many alternatives. Without good transit, it's difficult to get from home to anywhere without a car. Transportation and where we live both play an important part in what jobs are available to us. As you would expect, research shows that workers who have reliable transportation have an easier time getting and keeping jobs. Employers also have a preference for hiring workers who live closer to their jobs, particularly for lower income workers. And that makes sense. If your car breaks down and you need to find another way to get to work, that's a lot easier to do if you work 5 miles away than if you work 25. But when a community has a high quality transit system, that helps close that distance gap. It has the same effect of bringing workers physically closer to their jobs. So what that means is we can't plan for housing in a vacuum. If we want to truly create economic opportunity for our residents, we need to plan for a network of housing and jobs that are connected by transit. Bringing it back to the resiliency issue, transit and the way we develop our communities around it is also key to helping fight climate change. Driving makes up as much as half of an average US household's carbon dioxide output. And we know what an average house looks like. It's a single family home with a decent sized yard in the middle of a big neighborhood that's almost entirely residential, and you have to drive your car everywhere. But if you have transit oriented development, which is compact and has a mix of different land uses and is designed to encourage walking, you can reduce household carbon dioxide emissions anywhere from 20 to 40% in those areas. And in the densest downtowns, where you have a lot of people both living and working, those emissions could be reduced by nearly 80%. So transit is a critically important tool for reducing our impacts on the climate. So there are just a lot of good reasons to plan for homes, jobs, and transit together. But how do we do that in Pinellas County, where nearly 100% of our land is already developed? Well, we've got a plan. Advantage Pinellas is the name of our long-range countywide transportation and land use plan. It was developed with input from all 25 of our local governments. It calls for concentrating redevelopment on our major corridors with density and design that supports transit. Those corridors have a lot of vacant and underutilized commercial property. The average parcel is only occupied 22% by a building, and the rest is surface lots and drainage. So let's take those properties and turn them into higher density mixed use hubs with housing and jobs. Let's provide diverse housing types that are affordable to people with a range of incomes. And let's make it resilient so that we're building housing outside of flood zones and making sure the buildings are strong enough to withstand storms. And then let's take those mixed use hubs and use them as the framework for building a transit system. And we've got a number of tools that we can use to make it happen. We have, in Pinellas County, we have a countywide plan that coordinates land use among all of our local governments. We have a transportation work program that directs state and federal funding that is managed by the same agency. And we offer technical planning assistance to local communities. We also provide a forum for intergovernmental coordination. You've heard a few mentions of the Advantage Pinellas Housing Compact, which is an agreement between our local governments to work together to tackle housing affordability by sharing resources, developing a common approach for communications and public outreach, and then make commitments to reach our housing goals together. Thus far, we've had 5 communities sign on to that compact. We started with the first 5 largest communities in the county that receive state and federal funding of their own for affordable housing. But this year we are going to expand that and invite the remaining 20 local governments to sign on. So that is a quick introduction to Forward Pinellas, and I'm going to hand it over to Jerry.
Good morning, afternoon. I'm Jerry Murphy with the University of Florida Program for Resource Efficient Communities. As Chris said, we've been working on this for a while. I'm honored to be here and pleased that we're continuing this existential conversation about the region's approach to the future. Well, things just always get worse. Red is the highest flooding hazard activity, and it's growing. The coastal high hazard area has the highest risk for property and structural damages from tropical storms and other extreme weather, resulting in flooding and a creeping, existential, inevitable, insidious, permanent inundation of significant areas of the coastal shoreline over time. It's no place to build a residence, occupy a home. We already have enough people permanently occupying the coastal high hazard area with whom we will be working in the future, immediate and long term. But we should explore through the market commercial opportunities. As long as the businesses are fully aware of the risk, accept that risk, and hopefully are adequately insured in the event of a disaster, this is a more viable as a business model than the federal flood insurance is today. This commercialization should include transient residential uses that, upon adequate warning, like other commercial uses, can be safely evacuated. And transit, because we need especially to get internal combustion automobiles away from the coast and provide greater opportunities for alternative mobility, as noted earlier by Commissioner Starkey. The coast is dynamic. Land meets water, and it's surrounded by a diversity of life due to that dynamic interface. Some of that species diversity is increasingly endangered by how we occupy the shoreline, including us, humans. We should be planning now to accommodate geographic migration, managed retreat, as Walter mentioned, whatever you want to call it or don't want to call it. Some folks won't want to migrate. Some folks will. But in that creeping, existential, inevitable, insidious, permanent inundation of significant areas of the coastal shoreline over time, some folks won't have a choice. So that backbone that Commissioner Gerard noted and that bite the bullet actions that Commissioner Cruz mentioned. In policy furtherance of some of these principles, there are higher regulatory standards for low carbon land use and ideas for greenhouse gas reductions. These include green space preservation and multimodal transportation strategies that Commissioner Long noted. And the state has increasingly legislated in favor of waiving impact fees for affordable housing, and those opportunities shouldn't be overlooked. Dare I suggest a moratorium on zoning changes for new residential development that isn't affordable until the affordable housing challenge is met? Stick with the carrots of multiple incentives and local government assistance navigating the processes associated with building affordable housing, as discussed by Ms. Haas and Mr. Russo. So here are some photographs of alternative mobility developments that are occurring around the state and country. Hopefully, these are signs of more things to come in Florida and locally. Thank you.
So just to be clear, does everybody understand what the coastal high hazard area is? Because I don't think we defined that. You know, it is defined in state statutes as storm surge level A, category 1A, that synonymous term, or areas that is isolated by that. So, you know, something to consider too is, you know, when the CHHA, as Derek is mentioning, is moving inland, you know, horizontally on the map, that's one thing. But what it also means is the reason it's moving inland is because it's getting higher. And so these newer models are showing that surge is going to be more. So it's not only how far inland we can push, but those people that are already there at the coast, that threat level, design standards, higher criteria needs to be enforced for those people if we're going to keep them there. So I don't know if you guys have any last questions, but are there questions from the audience relative to any of the presentations out here? No? All right. So up to you guys, whether we want to push through or give more people more time. Yep, yep. Libby?
To allow increased density within the coastal high hazard zone. And sorry, I tried to touch the microphone. Yeah, so I do know that the council voted to increase density in the coastal high hazard, and we hear that some of that is looking at down at the working waterfront at the Salt Creek area. So just wondering about that. I think most of those industries have kind of started to move to maybe other areas that have a decreased real estate value that make more sense for some industry, but just kind of wondering about that.
Okay, there's a couple parts to that answer. So the first part is you heard me talk about accessory dwelling units, and these are just accessory plus ones to an existing single family house. The accessory dwelling unit discussion is not constrained by the coastal high hazard area limits. So there is, as part of the proposal, to allow accessory dwelling units in the coastal high hazard area. But the other part of your comment, just a minor clarification, the city council, by their action, did not automatically approve an increase in density in the coastal high hazard area. What they did by their action was they allowed future land use map amendment applications to be filed and considered for a change that would potentially result in an increase in density. But it did not by adoption simply increase the density. So in exchange for that, the one thing that was also paired with that change was a requirement for any new multifamily development located within the coastal high hazard area to now have to meet or include certain pre and post-storm resiliency actions or energy resiliency elements to be included in their development plan. So up to that point, we have existing zoning in place. Multifamily projects are allowed to be built in the coastal high hazard area. They were not required to consider pre or post-storm resiliency or energy efficiencies. As a consequence of that action, they are now required to do that. And so there were 14 different criteria that were included in the city code. And based on the number of units that are included in the proposal, they have to include certain elements from those 14 criteria or include some type of storm resiliency plan as part of their application at the time of consideration. Okay.
And Linda, I'd like to know a little bit more. You were discussing how resilience is being folded into this plan in the future, and you mentioned flood zones and then higher resilience. So one of the challenges that everybody faces is that there's a lot of models that are out there. There's a lot of different planning horizons that are out there. What is kind of guiding that when you're talking about, are you using regional resilience kind of standards that we're doing? Are you using, I know Pinellas just did a study for resilience themselves. What's kind of guiding those standards?
We are not using one specific source. We're using the preponderance of very good research that is out there to change our approach. We do use the coastal high hazard area. I mentioned we have a countywide plan that coordinates land use. All local government future land use plans have to be consistent with the countywide plan, so we can set standards that everyone has to follow. We have a set of what we call balancing criteria for if you have a land use amendment that increases density in the coastal high hazard area. We limit that by quite a bit. We will consider amendments that increase density in the coastal high hazard area, but you have to show that you're doing the minimum possible increase with the maximum possible mitigation. So just as an example, the typical amendment that we would see would be a project that needs 18 units an acre, and their current land use category only allows 15 units an acre. So it's not a big increase to begin with. And then if it's a big enough property, very often a property will be half in and half out of the coastal high hazard area. So developments can cluster all the units that they're now allowed to have outside the coastal high hazard area. So even if on the books it's a density increase, in actual fact, it's decreasing the amount that is being built in the coastal high hazard area. And then because development is newer, it's meeting more stringent building codes, it's often better equipped to handle a storm than what would be there today.
Yeah, I'll add to that. For those of you who are not familiar with Pinellas County, there is a multi-layer process. So even when you work through the city of St. Petersburg's requirements for an amendment to the future land use map, those applications then advance onto Linda Fisher's office at Forward Pinellas, and it has to run through that separate and independent analysis per the countywide rules. So it's not only a review at the city, but also a review at the county level. And also the description that she just gave you about projects that are sometimes in the coastal high hazard for part of the site, and then the balance of the site is outside. The city does have one of those properties where it was split. And in the site plan for that project, the developer located all the multifamily units outside of the coastal high hazard area and included their resident amenities such as the community garden and some of the clubhouse features in the coastal high hazard area to minimize any potential future impact.
All right, and so before we end, I just want to make a plug for the Association of State Floodplain Managers National Conference is in Orlando in 2 weeks. Jerry Murphy will be there. He is providing tools to help elected officials, your local planners deal with no adverse impact and how we actually get these things implemented in local communities. So again, thanks panelists and thanks for having us.